Hello everybody and welcome to Gene's Reviews from a regular dude here in my car. If you're already subscribed, thank you very much. If you're not yet subscribed, please think about doing so and make sure you tap that bell icon so you can be notified every single time I upload a new video. Also, give me a thumbs up if you don't mind. And if you stick around till the end of the video, I have a joke. Today, we're going to do one from Most Amazing Top 10. This is the darkest ancient rituals that summoned pure evil. So let's check it out.
Various dark rituals have haunted humanity throughout history, from brutal human sacrifices to eerie ceremonies to communicate with the dead. These are some of the darkest ancient rituals that summoned pure evil, whether people intended to or not. There are a plethora of horrific nightmare demons to choose from.
That's pretty scary.
Would you ever want to invoke this horrid-looking creature? This is a
Probably
depiction
not.
of a tilbury. These creatures come from Icelandic folklore, said to be created in a very specific way for a very specific purpose. They're crafted by witches to steal milk. The first written mentions of the tilbury date back to the 17th century, but stories about them may have come about much earlier than that. To create one of these lovely things, a woman must begin by stealing a rib from a recently buried body on White Sunday, the day that marks the beginning of the Pentecost. She then wraps this rib in gray wool, which she must also steal, typically from a widow's sheep. This bundle is kept close to her body, and for the next 3 Sundays during communion, she spits sanctified wine on the wool, gradually bringing the creature to life. Afterward, she lets it suckle from her thigh, which leads to a wart-like growth that marks her as its creator. Am I selling anyone on this yet? Sound appealing to any of the ladies in the audience? Let me know if you want to give this a try. It gets better though. Once the tilbury...
If I want milk, I'll just go to Walmart and get a gallon of milk. What do you think?
is active, it can be sent to suckle milk from other farmers' cows. Then it returns to its host to deposit the stolen milk, traditionally in a butter churn, but I mean, wherever you want it, I guess, I'm assuming anyway. Sticking with ancient Icelandic magic though for a minute, let's talk about necropants. And trust me, this is way more gross than it sounds. Although after the tilbury, I'm sure none of you are really surprised by that.
Right.
Necropants were said to provide the wearer with great fortune. You know, sounds like a pair of pants I'd want to have. All you gotta do is form a pact with a buddy. The pact being that if one of you died, the other could use their body to create the pants. After one friend passed away, the survivor would dig up the body and carefully skin the legs. You can see where this is going. Necropants were made out of the skin from the legs and feet of a corpse. Anyway, the magic didn't activate until a coin was stolen from a very poor widow, done at a specific time during one of Iceland's major festivals. The coin would then be placed in the round bits of the new pants, the part that makes for a perfect little pouch. Once the coin was in place, the necropants would start magically gathering wealth from the living. But the original coin could never be removed if the wearer wanted to keep the magic alive. We've all probably
Where did they
heard of
come
the
up
witches'
with that
Sabbath
stuff?
before, said to be a gathering of witches where dark rituals and practices took place. The idea became more popular in the 20th century, but modern researchers haven't found much evidence that these gatherings really happened as described. The tales of the witches' Sabbath were often stirred up by paranoia back in the late medieval and early modern periods in Europe during the witch hunts. Historian Scott E. Hendricks explains that stories about these gatherings were based on a mix of older myths which came together over time, evolving into what we think of as the witches' Sabbath. The book Compendium Maleficarum, published in 1608, describes witches riding flying goats and engaging in blasphemous acts like trampling the cross and making pacts with the devil. Descriptions of these rituals would have been used to help spread fear about supposed witchcraft, making the public more susceptible to the idea that there really were dark magic.
Keep that book far away from me.
Setting out to cast their spells on innocent townsfolk. Easiest way to control your population is through fear, after all.
Yeah.
In places like Italy, though, the Inquisition was a lot more skeptical about the existence of witches, and coincidentally, fewer accusations of witchcraft were made. The idea of evil witches riding around on broomsticks and dancing with demons definitely evokes some pretty eerie imagery, but the fact is there was just a lot worse stuff going on at this time, like what the Inquisition did to people they deemed as witches.
Yeah.
A lot of it makes the witches' Sabbath itself sound like an afternoon barbecue in the suburbs. Alright, mirror rituals. When we think of creepy mirror rituals today, Bloody Mary tends to come to mind.
Right,
But not
that's
only
what I first
are
thought
there
of.
similar but very different spooky games from various parts of the world, rituals like these have been around for centuries. Take this picture here of an early 20th century Halloween greeting card. The game being depicted here is the Halloween mirror ritual. The instructions vary, but essentially this was a divination ritual where a young woman would be instructed to gaze into a mirror holding a candle in a darkened room. Sometimes they'd have to walk up a staircase backwards holding a candle and a hand mirror. Don't try that, that sounds dangerous.
Yeah.
Sometimes a specific chant was also used, and as they stared into the mirror, it was said that their future husband's face would appear behind them. Hopefully, anyway. There was also the chance that a ghoulish face or a skull would appear, which was a foreboding sign that they'd die before getting married. Necromancy,
Why
the
even do
practice
it?
of communicating with the dead. This was sometimes practiced in ancient Greece and Rome. In both societies, necromancy had deep religious significance. In ancient Greece, necromancers would often seek out the help of spirits, hoping to see what would happen in the future. The most famous place for necromancy was the Oracle of the Dead at the site of Acheron, a river which was depicted as the entrance to the underworld in Greek mythology. Here, people would perform elaborate rituals, which often included offerings, sacrifices, and specific chants designed to awaken the spirits of the deceased. One method involved consulting the dead during a special festival called the Anthesteria. This event was held in honor of Dionysius. It was a night of festivities where families would honor their deceased relatives. On the final day, it was believed
Nothing wrong
that
with
the
that.
veil between the living and the dead was thinnest, allowing the living to communicate with spirits. You'd prepare a feast and leave food and drink as offerings. The hope was that in exchange, the spirits of the dead would give you insight about your future. In 1991,
It
aerial
might be
photographers
somebody you don't
flying
want to hear
southwest of
from, though.
Berlin, Germany, spotted this structure down below. It would later be nicknamed the German Stonehenge. This site consists of 7 concentric rings formed by banks and ditches with post holes where wooden poles once stood. At first glance, it seemed like a fascinating archaeological find, and it was.
It
but
looked like
became clear that
tombstones.
there was a darker side to it when archaeologists started excavating artifacts from the site. When researchers dug down to the oldest layer, dating from 2321 to 2211 BC, they uncovered pottery shards, animal bones, stone axes, and most disturbingly, human remains, but only women and youths. It was also clear that they hadn't died of natural causes. This would have been a pretty brutal affair. And they appeared to have been tossed into deep shafts with little care. Now, this wouldn't have been nearly as strange if they didn't discover the next set of graves. Just nearby, 13 men were buried in a much more respectful manner, and there were barely any signs of physical trauma. It looked as if the men had been honored in death while the women and youths were killed. As for why, that's still unclear, but it's possible they'd been sacrificed during some sort of brutal ritual. Imagine being crushed by a 12,000-pound elephant. In medieval Southeast Asia, enemy soldiers, tax evaders, thieves, they could all look forward to dying at the hands, or rather the feet, of an elephant. Usually it would involve the criminal being crushed by the elephant, but at times other methods of death were used. Some of these elephants would have blades fitted to their tusks, which their owners would train them to slice at their victim with. Typically the elephant would just step on the person,
woolly
either
mammoth
killing them
type?
instantly or drawing things out longer. It would all depend on how the executioner wanted to go about it. This form of punishment was used in India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and it was used for a relatively long time. Some even say as recently as the 19th century. Imagine if you came into work one day and found out that your boss had died. You'd be pretty bummed, depending on how you felt about your boss anyway. But imagine then being told that you weren't just required to attend your boss's funeral, you'd also be getting buried along with them. Because They'd have a lot of important business to be getting done in the afterlife, and you were still under there. This was fairly common for servants of pharaohs and other high-ranking members of society in ancient Egypt. In the case of Egypt, this wasn't a punishment in any way, though. This was viewed as an honor and a privilege. The afterlife was very important to ancient Egyptians. Life after death was almost more important than life. So joining your master and crossing over to the other side wasn't seen as such a scary thing. But by today's standards, it's definitely unsettling. I also have to imagine that some folks must have started questioning their beliefs right before death. It would be pretty bold to say nobody
I definitely
just
would.
a little bit nervous. Imagine the Wi-Fi in your neighborhood goes down, or there's a massive citywide power outage, or the economy takes a nosedive, and in order to fix the problem, someone, one single individual, is going to be chosen to bear the brunt of all the blame. A scapegoat. This random person, probably a criminal or an outcast of some kind, is then paraded through the city where people pelt them with things, spit on them, hit them, before they're either kicked out of town or killed. That would be insane, but to many ancient Greeks, it was completely normal. The ritual was known as pharmakos, and during times where things were especially bad, like a famine, for example, a person would be chosen to take on the community's sins or troubles. Again, they'd be a marginalized member of society, like a slave, a criminal. The community would gather for the ceremony, and the chosen individual would be paraded through the streets, often dressed in strange or dirty clothes, and sometimes smeared with ashes or other substances. In the end, they'd be exiled.
Sounds like a certain former president that they blame for everything.
This person, the community could cleanse itself of all its misfortune and hopefully restore harmony to the land. The practice of mummifying the bodies of the dead was done to preserve the body for the afterlife, as the Egyptians believed in an eternal existence beyond death. Now, the thing is, nowadays, especially in the Western world, we have a much less close and personal relationship with death. Death is something that we just often don't like thinking about. So to us, mummies are just creepy. They're a representation of our fear of the decay of the human body. But what did the mummification process involve? Well, it would begin with the removal of internal organs, including the brain, which was extracted through the nostrils using specialized hooks. After the organs were removed, the body was washed, and then natron was packed around the body and left for a period of about 40 days to draw out moisture and prevent decay. Then the body was treated with oils and resins to help preserve the skin and tissues. Then it would be wrapped in bandages. Sometimes there would also be protective amulets inscribed with spells to guide the deceased safely through the afterlife, especially if you were more higher ranking. But then we come to another element of mummification, the curses. When it came to mummies, especially those who've been higher ranking members of society, they did not want people messing with their tombs, and often curses would be placed on them, warning grave robbers about the tragedies that would befall them if they took anything from the tomb. With all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video. I was going to say that.
Wow, that was some creepy stuff. I like that. I like that video. I like this channel. They come up with some really interesting stuff, and they go more in detail with it all. I find it interesting anyway. I hope you guys do too. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below. Now it's time for a joke. What bear is the most condescending? A panda